Tonight on Primetime Politics, promising to make good on his threat.
So that goes on the 4th of March.
Donald Trump says the promised tariffs on Canadian goods will happen next Tuesday, saying Ottawa is still failing to address the illegal flow of fentanyl making its way into the United States. Coming up, we'll speak to former Foreign Affairs Minister Peter MacKay. How should Canada respond? Also, the Pledge for Canada. We will speak to MP Charlie Angus and Community Leader Fareed Khan, who both say it is time for Ottawa to stop kowtowing to the U.S. president. And Election Day in Ontario. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, that 30-day pause on those punishing U.S. tariffs are coming to an end next Tuesday because, as we heard from Donald Trump today, he does not believe Canada is doing enough to address his concerns about fentanyl coming into the U.S. from its northern border.
From the talks with Canada and Mexico so far, are you not seeing the progress that you wanted in order to
I don't see it at all. No, not on drugs. They should be apprehending much more because a lot comes through Canada. And as Mexico gets stronger in terms of the border, it goes up to Canada, and a lot of drugs are coming in through Canada.
Now, law enforcement officials say less than 1% of apprehended fentanyl going into the U.S. comes from Canada, but Trump maintains more is getting across than what's been reported. In the meantime, Canada has committed more than $1 billion to bump up security at the U.S. border. It has also appointed a fentanyl czar. Still, if Trump does go ahead with tariffs on Tuesday, the Prime Minister says Canada is ready to respond.
If on Tuesday there are unjustified tariffs brought in on Canada, we will have an immediate and extremely strong response, as Canadians expect.
Well, to talk about this and other matters, we're now joined by Peter MacKay, Foreign Affairs Minister in the Harper government. Peter, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Always a pleasure, Michael.
Listen, let's start here with tariffs, because despite commitments made by Canada, Donald Trump says he is going to go ahead with this 25% tariff come Tuesday, Trump using fentanyl as his reason. But was this ever really about drugs? And I know you can't speak for the U.S. president, but I'm wondering what your read on the issue is.
Well, firstly, let's start with Canada's reaction, where, to the credit of those involved, we were able to muster up significant resources that included drones and dogs and putting more border security in place. And there's been clearly an effort to apprehend the traffickers in fentanyl and beef up the border, as was requested. And yet it appears that this has had little or no effect with the stated intentions to put in tariffs next week. And so you begin to wonder whether there is any amount of effort that would result in a change, or whether this was really all just another bargaining chip and moving on to the next lever to pull, which time will tell what that might be, Michael.
Yeah, and you're right, because it's been so unpredictable. But we did hear the Prime Minister today say that countervailing tariffs would be applied immediately. Is that the right strategy?
Well, I think it is. If we arrive at that point, I don't know that bargaining in public and targeting certain states or certain sectors of the American economy, at least publicly stating it until we get to that critical point, was the right strategy. But certainly there is going to have to be retaliatory tariffs in place. And look, it has to be stated, this idea that getting into a tariff war is somehow going to benefit the United States is poppycock. There's just no way. This is mutual assured destruction. It's the equivalent of standing on a bridge while you're burning it. And there are many in the auto sector, in the construction sector, farmers certainly in the United States, many others who are going to feel the pain. Not least of all is the American consumer, especially on energy. And that may be, pardon the pun, the trump card that is yet to be played. But the U.S., if it wants to make America great again, is going to need Canadian products. And we should be talking about making North America great again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we've heard, for example, from the Ontario Premier. You know, Trump has not only upended the Canada-U.S. relationship, though, he's also upending the rules-based international order. He's criticized Ukraine for starting the war, which it did not. It was Russia that violated international law with its invasion. Trump today continued to praise Putin. You know, how should Canada react to this shifting stance, not only vis-a-vis the Canada-U.S. relationship, but the U.S. with the Western allies?
Well, I would add to that list of sort of unbelievable statements and things that have happened in recent days. The United States supporting a UN Security Council resolution that essentially denies that Russia started the war and that Ukraine is somehow to blame. So we're really into a scenario where it is so unbelievable. The European allies have been curiously quiet, probably out of a sense of not wanting to put themselves in the crosshairs. But Canada has to essentially continue to reach out. We have to obviously try to diversify our trade, which is something we should have started a long time ago, but nevertheless, here we are. And we have to continue to engage at every level with institutions, chambers of commerce, governors, particularly in border states, those who can prevail upon the president that this is a net sum loss if we continue down the path of a trade war. And, you know, perhaps one of the things that we have to consider in the future, Michael, is simply saying, let's accelerate this trade talk. Let's bring forward the USMCA and start those negotiations now. Let's not wait a year, because at least then we have a forum and some rules and some ability to look our counterparts in the eye. But this sort of death by tweet has got our entire economy swinging in the breeze, and we're in a very, very uncertain time. It's affecting the dollar, it's affecting the markets, and it is going to lead to potentially tipping Canada and other economies, if tariffs persist, into a recession.
Mm-hmm. Now, you know, I had to take note of the fact they said that European allies have been quiet, and the British Prime Minister was at the White House today, and a joint news conference was held this afternoon. Keir Starmer was asked if he discussed with Trump the president's repeated talk about annexing Canada, whether the king expressed any concerns about annexation, losing one of his realms. Take a listen to what we heard from the British PM.
You mentioned Canada. I think you're trying to find a divide between us that doesn't exist. We're the closest of nations, and we had very good discussions today, but we didn't discuss Canada.
Thank you. Please.
So, no words of defense for Canada from Starmer. Trump, as you heard, cuts him off. King Charles has been very silent, our head of state. Where are Canada's allies? Do we need to start looking for new ones, Peter?
Well, you know, to quote Prime Minister Starmer, closest of allies don't stand silently by when a schoolyard bully approach is being invoked. They intervene, they help, and we're not seeing any of that, not just from the UK, we're not seeing it from any of our closest European Union allies, Asia Pacific and others. And so, you know, we're in a very difficult situation, Canada and Mexico, which, you know, I repeat, it doesn't need repeating, but why Canada? Why on earth would the President of the United States, with all of the challenges that are out there, with actual wars brewing on the doorstep, or raging on the doorstep of Europe, and you choose to go after your greatest trade partner, your closest security ally, the country you share the North American continent with, it's really inconceivable. So what do we do? Again, diversifying, looking for allies where we can find them. But, you know, perhaps most notably, we start looking for ways to build our own capacity, breaking down interprovincial trade barriers for starters, buying Canadian products, building our manufacturing sector. And I have to say, not in a partisan way, but we should have our parliament back in session. My goodness, this is a moment of national emergency. And I get that there is a Liberal leadership contest still underway, but we need to have the Democratic Parliament in session to be able to rally nonpartisan support for a unified Canadian response to this crisis.
Peter MacKay, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
My pleasure, Michael. All the best.
You too. Well, Donald Trump's incessant talk of hurting Canada economically and making this country the 51st state has rallied Canadians to take their own action. From coast to coast to coast, we are seeing outbursts of unapologetic pride, from flags being waved to Buy Canadian efforts organized on social media, to trips being canceled to the United States to keep Canadian dollars here at home or spent in other more friendly countries. And to all of this, take a listen to how proudly hockey fans belted out the national anthem during the Four Nations Cup. Well, it's those kinds of demonstrations of Canadian pride and nationalism that our next two guests are encouraging Canadians to embrace and protect. Charlie Angus is the NDP Member of Parliament for Timmins James Bay in Ontario. He also helped launch the Pledge for Canada. And with him today, Fareed Khan, he is the founder of the group Canadians United Against Hate. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
You know, Charlie, I'm going to get you to start us out here, because when you talk about Donald Trump making this existential tariff threat on the Canadian economy, you see this more than just an economic threat. You also see this as a threat against Canadian values. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think what's really important is for us to recognize the danger of this moment. We are in a period that's unlike anything except maybe the 1930s, and the threat to democracy, the threat to the rule of law, the threat to the international order that cost so many lives to create and defend against the fascists in the Second World War. This is the menace that Donald Trump is posting. To have a president say we don't even have a right to be a nation puts us in completely uncharted territory. And one of the things that really struck me from the get-go was ordinary Canadians understood the threat instinctively. The boycotts that we're seeing, this was all grassroots. These were ordinary Canadians saying that they wanted to stand up. What we were not seeing initially was a coherent position from our Canadian leaders, and I'm not sure if we still see that, which was one of the reasons the Pledge for Canada was created, was to try and put a frame on what is it that we actually are defending, what is it about our values that Canadians feel must be always front and foremost in any negotiations with basically a gangster regime in Washington.
Mm-hmm. And how do you define those values?
The values of the rule of law, of our inclusivity. We're seeing this horrific beating down on the vulnerable in the United States. Donald Trump's horrific videos of him at a beach resort in Gaza. Those are fundamentally anti-Canadian values. So the pledge was to lay out sort of a framework of what we will protect, and then ask people to sign on and to try and get a good cross-section of Canadian society so that we could show that this is not a partisan effort, this is not a political point of view, this is who Canadians are. And I think if you look at the signatories to that pledge, it's incredibly impressive, and it shows that Canadians understand the need right now that we have a potentially dangerous neighbor who believes that our values, our democracy, our standards of law and inclusivity are something that they can take away from us, and we're not going to let that happen.
You use the word danger. Fareed, I'll bring you in, because you were very clear when you talk about this. You say Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to Canada. Is that reacting too strongly to what we've seen from the U.S. president?
I don't think so. All you have to do is look at his history, not just now recently when he was reelected, but also during his first presidency. And look at the language that he has used against people who he sees as, who he perceives as enemies. Charlie and I did a media conference on February 14th, and I referenced this in my remarks. There was a book written in 2017 to which 27 psychiatrists and other mental health professionals contributed. It was called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. And I referenced that in my remarks, and I'd like to reference it again here. In that book, some of the assessments that Trump's the psychiatrists and mental health professional used was Trump is an impulsive, immature, incompetent person who, when in a position of ultimate power, would easily slide into the role of tyrant. His sociopathic characteristics are undeniable and present a profound threat to democracy. He is a profoundly evil man exhibiting malignant narcissism. And, this one really struck me. If left unchecked, his pathological narcissism could lead to World War III. This is the person that we are dealing with. And it's not just him, it's the people who surround him, who are enabling him, who are not doing anything to pull him back. As Charlie said, we are living in probably the most dangerous times for Canada since the 1930s. And certainly in our lifetime, we've never experienced something like this. And he is not only a threat to our national integrity and our sovereignty, but he is a threat to every Canadian. And I think that Canadians are slowly coming to realize this, but it needs to move faster. Our politicians need to be moving faster, and the media need to start talking about Trump in this sort of language to convey the very real threat that he is to all of us.
Charlie, you were in Munich just a couple weeks ago. Brussels, in Europe, just a couple weeks ago. When you speak to the other allies, when you speak to people who are politicians in other countries dealing with this, is anyone standing up for Canada right now?
So I was at the NATO meetings just after J.D. Vance launched a full-on assault on Western democracy in Munich. The Munich conference stunned the world. And what really struck me in Brussels was the confusion and the terror amongst our allies. I was really going to Brussels expecting that we'd see strong positions from the French, from the Germans, from the UK. They were still tiptoeing around, and it fell to Canada, it fell to me as a delegate to stand up and call this out, to say what happens to NATO, what happens to the Western alliances when we have a government that is actually one of the main partners is trying to undermine and threaten. And then I began to hear, because I think I spoke up, the Baltic states, they're right on Putin's front line. Romania is really concerned that J.D. Vance is undermining their democracy. We started to hear from people who recognize now that Trump is doing Putin's bidding, undermining Ukraine, undermining the rule of law, and nobody's coming to save Canada. That's the message I brought back. The Europeans, I think, really understand the need to be allied with nations like Canada, but we are on our own, and we're going to have to rethink this. And as Fareed said, our politicians need to get a game plan very quickly. This isn't something, we're just going to, deal with a fentanyl czar and deal with some problems on the border and we're going to go back to normal. We have to fundamentally rethink our economy. We're going to have to rethink our defense. We're going to have to rethink our whole diplomatic approach if we have a potentially malignant threat on our 5,000-mile border. Where is Canada going to be in the world? Saying all that, I feel very, very positive that Canadians get it. Canadians are strong. Canadians will get through this, but we need to have a framework, which is, again, going back to the pledge, was why we really felt the necessity on the eve of the first round of threats to get a statement out there to say this is who we are as a nation, to get people all across the board from, Kim Campbell to Danny Williams to Arcade Fire to Indigenous activist Pam Palmatier to our labor leaders coming together and saying across the spectrum of Canadian voices, we believe that they're fundamental Canadian values. And these are fundamental values we will fight for, and these are fundamental values we will never, ever trade to a gangster who's threatening us.
Okay, so what do you want to see here? Fareed, you come to this Canadians United Against Hate. What do you want to see happen from the leadership in this country? Because already Canadians are boycotting American goods, they're canceling trips to the United States. What more do you want to see happen?
Well, what I'd like to see is our national leaders and our provincial leaders use the sort of language that describes Donald Trump as Charlie has, using the words that Charlie has used. He's a gangster, he's a thug, he's a racist, he's an enabler of white supremacy, he's an Islamophobe, and all we have to do is look at the executive orders that he has signed off on attacking migrants, attacking the transgender community, attacking the LGBTQ2 community, attacking refugees. This is a man who thrives on hate. And we saw it in his first administration, and the result of his language was that a Canadian white supremacist walked into a mosque in Quebec City just after he had been inaugurated the first time and murdered 6 Muslim men while they were praying. He enabled white supremacy in Canada through the use of this language. They became emboldened. So what I would like to see from our leaders is to stop pussyfooting around. Stop using polite diplomatic language and look at him as the threat that he is, not just to Canada, but to the world. I mean, to quote once again that the line from that book is that, you know, this is a man who could start World War III. And we are the front lines. I've seen this analogy used previously, you know, and people have started looking at the U.S. like the same way that Nazi Germany was observed in the 1930s. If the U.S. is Nazi Germany, then we are Austria, which Nazi Germany annexed in the lead up to World War II. So this is the threat that we are facing, and you know, we have to push back not only against the politics and the economic threat that he has presented to us. We need to push back at the very core of who he is, which is the hate that he engenders and that he enables through his public statements. And Canada is in danger. All Canadians are in danger, and everybody needs to wake up and smell the coffee, and especially our top leaders, not just, you know, our provincial premiers, but the man or the woman who ends up becoming the leader of the Liberal Party and who would then become Prime Minister. They need to start talking in language that is forceful more than what they have been doing, and to basically stand behind what Canadians already realize, that this man could basically destroy our nation.
Charlie, quickly running out of time, what do you want to see?
I want to reiterate my intense pride in ordinary Canadians. I've never seen anything like the outpouring of determination, and it reminds me that, you know, Canada has always stood against extremism. Canada has stood up to fascists. You know, when we were a nation of 11 million people, we had the fourth largest Navy in the world, fourth largest Air Force. Our soldiers fought all across Europe to fight Nazis, and many of our relatives never came home from that. That's our tradition. That's who we are. We need now to have a national Canada focus that we are dealing with a malignant threat. I don't think it's about being afraid. I think it's about being determined. And I know Canada will get through this, but we cannot have our provincial premiers trying to cut side deals. We cannot have people tiptoeing around and hoping that it's all just an act. It's not an act. Canadians get that. We really do need our political leaders to understand the size of the threat, and we need to be working at the international level to start finding alliances with like-minded countries who will create some kind of alternative to the world that we're in right now.
Charlie, Angus, Fareed Khan, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
To Ontario now, as today is Election Day in the province, a 28-day campaign, the results of which will be known later tonight. And this morning, we did see 3 of the 4 main party leaders cast their ballots, with the PC leader Doug Ford and the NDP leader Margaret Stiles making one last final pitch for votes.
I'm asking for your vote to have a strong mandate to outlive and outlast Donald Trump. I'm going to protect the people of Ontario. I'm going to protect your families, your jobs, your communities, and businesses. So I'd be very, very grateful for your support.
We know what we need to do today, right? Yeah. We need to get everybody out to vote. Yeah. For the NDP, for a government and a premier that's on your side.
Well, let's get into the Ontario election now with Sabrina Nanji, journalist and the woman behind the Queen's Park Observer. Sabrina, nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, nice to be with you, Michael.
Listen, let's start with Doug Ford and the PC leader here, because, you know, the polls, as we have noted, have been in his favor since the start of this campaign. But then yesterday he makes this amazing comment saying that he feels that the PCs could walk away with all 124 ridings today. What do you make of that? How much of that is bravado?
Yeah, I think, you know, Ford has been confident throughout this entire campaign. And you're right, they are talking a big game. I mean, people in that war room are talking about how they're going to win more than 90 seats. Of course, you know, that would be a huge feat for the Conservatives. Just in the history of this province, it's very rare to win a majority mandate on your third go around, right? And we know, though, that the Ford campaign has been running a front runner campaign from day one. I mean, they've had limited media appearances. You know, I'm not happy about that as a journalist, but it's something that you do when you're the guy to beat. He's been, sticking to this ballot box question and the PC's framing of it, which has been tariffs and, the uncertainty with Trump. And I guess, a broader perspective on that is the economy, right? And leadership, like who do Ontarians believe is best suited to face Trump and the threat of tariffs. Meanwhile, the Liberals and the NDP, while they've sort of been jockeying for second place here, they've been sticking to more provincial, actual provincial issues, stuff that's, more so in the provincial jurisdiction. Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals have been talking a lot about healthcare and a lot about access to a family doctor. That is something that's also top of mind for a lot of Ontarians. Meanwhile, the New Democrats and Marit Stiles have been talking about cost of living and things like, the grocery rebate and rent control, so housing too. The thing is all the oxygen in the room and the news cycle has been all about Trump and tariffs. And so I think that has worked out in Doug Ford's favor. Of course, we're going to see how it all shakes out in a couple of hours later tonight.
Yeah, we will see later tonight. Although, it was interesting because when you and I came together along with Rob Benzie to talk about the start of this race, we were talking about how the race for second might be the more unpredictable one to keep an eye on, since the Conservatives the PCs rather, were so far ahead in the polling numbers. How is the race for second shaping up between Marit Stiles of the NDP and Bonnie Crombie of the Liberals?
Yeah, we have seen, I guess, maybe towards the end of the campaign, the Liberals leapfrogging the New Democrats when it comes to, the public opinion polls. I would say that maybe the wrench in all of this is the fact that the NDP's vote is more concentrated. And so when they win big, they win really big. And when they lose, it can be really devastating. And so that's where I'm going to be paying attention to some of these key places in Toronto, for instance, and the 905. I know there's a lot of spots, especially in downtown, Toronto proper, that the Liberals are going to try and poach from the NDP. So that area is going to be crucial for us to watch tonight. But you're right. I think that Bonnie Crombie has really been doing her best to bring the Liberals out of the political wilderness. They've been sidelined, not even recognized status since 2018. And we have seen Bonnie Crombie, I guess, find her footing a little bit. She's been, really had her elbows up. She's been, landing these major punches to Doug Ford. It hasn't really quite been enough to bring him down so much in the polls, but it does seem to be working, at least, from what the public opinion surveys are telling us. It seems to be working in maybe, poaching some anti-Ford voters that might have voted for the NDP. I think that Bonnie Crombie sort of appealing to New Democrats and saying, you got to pick Liberal for strategic voting, for the anti-Ford vote. I wonder how that's going to play out. That's something I'll be paying attention to.
Yeah, something to watch out for. Although, what's interesting as well is that when you talk about Ontario politics, the NDP vote is more efficient. They come out with more seats with less numbers than perhaps the Liberals need in order to come up with an equal number of seats. So that's something that we'll have to watch out for tonight, just how well the polling numbers translate into seat count.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Even in the last round in 2022, the NDP, it was sort of similar to what we had seen now, that the NDP and the Liberals were pretty much neck and neck in the polls, but obviously on election day, the NDP did a lot better and formed official opposition. I think that's a bit more of a question this time around. And we know that when you get recognized party status, that makes your job a lot easier at Queen's Park, right? You get a lot of extra resources, money, you get more speaking time in question period. And so while, we might not wake up tomorrow to completely a sea change at Queen's Park, I think definitely for the Ford government and accountability and I guess, the future of the Liberal Party even in Ontario, I think a lot of those questions will be answered tomorrow morning.
Okay, well, I know one person whose job is not so easy today, and that's yours. So I appreciate you taking the time on a busy election day. Sabrina Nanji, thank you for this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And you can watch the Ontario election tonight right here on CPAC and on cpac.ca. Coverage starts with our friends at Global News at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. But for now, that is Primetime Politics for this Thursday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow night. Until then, take care.